A history lesson? As if real life wasn't already overflowing with vampire staking, now Buffy has begun to dream about slaying. Night after night, it's the same thing. She's back with the Puritans, a slayer on the trail of a witch. What can it mean? Buffy gets a clue when Xander and Giles start acting like they have ancient alter egos. Now the stage is set for a symbolic replay of the night the Master was accidentally trapped in the other dimension. No it isn't. Only this time, the Master wants a happy ending. For himself. Buffy and her friends must prevent the Master from rewriting the script and escaping his supernatural prison before Sunnydale becomes history. Yeah, this publisher only read a summary. The third, or possibly second, Buffy the Vampire Slayer tie-in novel is Night of the Living Rerun by Arthur Byron cover, published March 1st, 1998. Based on and essentially following Season 1, the book gives us a borderline Lovecraftian plot about the efforts to raise an ancient demon with a conflict occurring during the Salem witch trials, manifesting in the present day. A mysterious statue gives the Scoobies visions of their past lives from the Salem witch trials, and even allows their previous incarnations to possess them, like reruns of a cancelled TV series playing out in the present. It's up to Buffy to interpret the clues while dodging a suspicious reporter, Giles' ex-girlfriend and her husband, a bunch of zombies, and the living rerun before an ancient prophecy culminates in the old one coming back in a new body. That of the Master, eager for a rematch. The plot begins with Joyce getting a new art gallery piece, an abstracted humanoid sculpture made by an Italian fascist, implied to be an occultist. A good subversion of the Lovecraftian trope of making the occultists people of color and those typically marginalized by society. Turn it around and make it a fascist. His structure, the Moon Man, is composed of moonstone. Night of the Living Rerun suggests some inherent mystical quality to the moon, similar to its portrayal in Season 5, Episode 9, Listening to Fear, but with a take reminiscent of the geocentric celestial sphere idea from before War of the Worlds made us think about alien civilizations, and more about metaphysics. Joyce gives Buffy a notebook with an image of the Moon Man on it, and Buffy uses it for a dream journal. Soon, Buffy starts having a vivid series of dreams of the life of another Slayer, Samantha Kane, a witch hunter involved in the Salem witch trials. She dismisses most of the witch hunt as paranoid, but knows that there is one witch involved, Sarah Dinsdale. Samantha tracks her through the woods, fights a zombie, and then Buffy wakes up. The dream is evocative of the movie's depiction of Buffy as a reincarnation of all past Slayers. Similar to Halloween Reign's depiction of Buffy reliving the conflict of another past Slayer. And I speculate that both cover and Halloween Reign's authors, Nancy Holder and Christopher Golden, started their projects after watching the movie for ideas. Of course, the TV series retcons this, as Buffy simply having precognitive powers. So I suspect someone at Mutant Enemy shot down this idea, prompting the authors to do a few rewrites to make their stories conform to the TV series Slayer rules. Halloween Reigns simply draws parallels between Buffy and the past Slayer, and Night of the Living Rerun portrays the reincarnation as more or less Buffy being possessed by Samantha's ghost as triggered by the Moon Man, while extending reincarnation to the other Scoobies. In my review of Season 1, Episode 3, Witch, I described in great detail how much I dislike the evil witch trope because of its origin in witch hunts. I used How Stuff Works as a source when describing the high numbers of victims, and these numbers have been challenged as hyperbole inflated by neo-paganists, creating a mythological ostracism, but whether it was over 100,000 victims, as How Stuff Works reports, or according to the more legitimate Witchcraft in Europe, 40 to 50,000, the witch hunts represent a breakdown of human morality and rationality, stems from misogyny, racism, and xenophobia, and should not be glorified. It's a lynch mob mentality. That being the case, I don't particularly like plots that are like, what if the Salem witch trials had a real evil witch? Look, a corrupt state that thought innocent people were boogeymen from stories murdered 20 people. Let's take this seriously, shall we? I like Hocus Pocus, but it's problematic for portraying the Salem witch hunters as God-serving good guys who target real evil witches who kill children and call Satan master. The Hammer horror film Twins of Evil depicts witch hunters as antagonistic, but ultimately misguided servants of goodness who can be taught to kill vampires, who fit the role of witches in the town who must be hunted. Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost initially depicts a small-town witch hunt as bad for harassing innocent pagans, but has the twist that the innocent pagans are actually evil witches, so the witch hunters were right all along. Boy Meets World Season 5, Episode 5, The Witches of Pembroke, does a similar thing with supposedly harmless neo-pagans who do charity work and have fun parties, who are actually evil Satan worshippers trying to murder our heroes. Any kind of, well, the witch hunters actually make a good point plot is fundamentally aggressive, along similar moral failings that lead people to support fascism. Buffy the Vampire Slayer eventually does something decent with the Salem witch trials in Season 3, Episode 11, Gingerbread, by portraying the state corruption as demonic and using the "what if there are real witches" plot to suggest innocents targeted by a fascist regime.
Aw man, it's Nazi Germany and I've got Playboys in my locker.
Unfortunately, Night of the Living Rerun comes from Season 1's place of fearing the evil witch in our midst, and it approaches the Salem witch trials with the suggestion that if there is a witch, she must be evil, and the Puritans have a point. It ends up like Twins of Evil in depicting the Puritans as antagonistic, but ultimately misguided and having a point. There is a witch among them, one who is sympathetic because we don't like the Puritans for being sexist and not liking Christmas, but one who is necessarily aligned against God, because that's what Buffyverse witches looked like back then, and I suspect that Cover wrote it even before Jenny's introduction as a morally gray techno-pagan in Season 1, Episode 8, I, Robot You, Jane. It's better than Witch, but it's ultimately a problematic take on the Salem witch trials. Buffy initially keeps the dreams to herself and uses it to ace her history test. Pretty prescient take on her. But her friends start having similar visions, indicating that they too are reincarnations of people from the Salem witch trials. Giles has visions of Samantha's Watcher and learns of the importance of a prophecy about the return of the Despised One, an old one who could threaten the entire planet if raised. Unfortunately, this exposition takes the form of an info dump that gives me flashbacks of Thomas Covenant. Sarah Dinsdale's reincarnation turns out to be Xander, startling him with visions of life as a girl. This has potential for both queer storytelling and transmisogyny. But Cover is so direct about it that neither really apply. Giles has a seance to invoke Sarah's spirit and allow her to speak through Xander so that they can interrogate her, and she moves his body like a woman would, but there's no real exploration of androgyny. Xander is uncomfortable and makes jokes about it, but doesn't display disgust about it. There is a suggestion of a humorous image of Nicholas Brendon moving like a woman and like a woman pretending to be a man, but I think Cover didn't really know how to describe it, and it just ended up too stark to really have any character. It's not delightful queerness, but it's not the transmisogyny of Season 2 Episode 5 Reptile Boy and Season 2 Episode 6 Halloween, either. Through Xander, Sarah tells her story of being the Witch of Salem, lusting after the young preacher, John Goodman, shunning the word of God, dancing under the light of the moon, and stumbling onto a strange Stonehenge structure made from moonstone. Yep, we're picking on the druids again. I swear this is inspired by Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. A note on John Goodman. I am 99% confident that this is a joke. John Goodman, of course, is a modern American comedy actor, known for his role on Roseanne and The Connors. In my research of the Salem witch trials, I could find no reference to a John Goodman. However, Goodman was a title used by the Puritans on the order of Mr. When Cover did his research, I'm sure he came across references to Goodman Farrar and Goodman Buckley, and I can imagine him just sticking in the name John Goodman as a joke. I leave the extra 1% as room for one of my commenters to show me up with superior research. Sarah casts a love spell on John Goodman to make him fall for her. This is portrayed as a bad thing, but not for the right reasons. Her power comes from Satan, who is treated in this text as a real literal guy, not from God. By virtue of being a witch, she is abominable, and she desecrated something holy by making a reverend fall for her. The fact that she effectively roofied him is not acknowledged at all. Even Season 2, Episode 16, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, with its problematic dismissal of women sexually assaulting men, was able to recognize love spells as date rape spells.
You invoke the Great Roofie Spirit.
According to Sarah, who is an unreliable narrator, while she is technically a villain, there are worse villains. Cultists trying to raise the despised one, including Cotton Mother, a reverend who cheered on the Salem witch trials, and Thomas Danforth, the judge who presided over them, both of them historical figures. Sarah conspired with them but was thrown under the bus, apparently because of misogyny, though it's not really gone into. At the same time, the Scoobies have to deal with Daryl McGovern, a busybodying reporter poking around to find some proof of the supernatural. Though he's a national joke, roughly equivalent to Giorgio A. Tsoukalos, he has enough clout to annoy the Scoobies with his investigations. After trying to harass Joyce for info on the Moon Man, Buffy intimidates him on camera, motivating him to go after her. He follows her to the seance, which causes him to revert back to a previous incarnation, Cotton Mother. Wow, what a coinky-dink. Yes, this guy just happens to be the reincarnation of Cotton Mother. Cotton Mother is depicted like a rude, annoying authority figure who happens to be evil, kind of like a cross between Peter Cushing's character in Twins of Evil and Principal Snyder. He runs off and steals the Moon Man, with Buffy chasing after him. He loses her in a really weird scene that throws any facsimile of a masquerade to the wayside, with a summoned horde of Night of the Living Dead style zombies going after Buffy, who defeats them by leading them into a heavily trafficked area where cops and civilians can fight them. People run them over with cars and shoot at them because apparently Sunnydale has a bunch of gun nuts. It's bizarre. In the middle of all this intrigue are Laura and Rick Church, Giles' ex-girlfriend and her new husband, occult fans who raised the spirit of Sarah Dinsdale in a seance and were told to seek out her reincarnation in Sunnydale. Of course, if Xander is Sarah, she couldn't have appeared to them, meaning that someone impersonated her to manipulate them. But who? And why? Laura offers a bit of insight into Giles' past. As hinted at in Season 1, Episode 5, Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, we learn that he was a nerdy occult fan who watched a lot of Hammer movies and dated Laura while attending Oxford. When he became a Watcher, he needed to abandon his former life, and a spell was cast to erase Giles from her mind. That is honestly terrifying, but logically consistent with the way he presents Buffy needing to dump Owen to protect him, and will play out in show canon with Angel's widespread memory manipulation in Angel Season 5. I think this whole dump Mary Jane to protect her idea is disrespectful, but Angel ultimately critiques it in Season 5. Anyway, Laura shouldn't remember Giles, but the imposter ghost breaks down the spell. The imposter turns out to be Judge Danforth, who is the previous incarnation of Rick. The seance that Rick and Laura conducted awakened Danforth in him, and Danforth used his occultist magic to simulate all the various ghosts that Laura thinks that they successfully called. This is set up fairly cleverly, where Laura describes a bunch of implausible things, and looks like a kook like McGovern, but is actually being hoaxed by Danforth. And what a coinkydink that all of these Salem witch people show up at exactly the right time. Danforth, Cotton Mother, and Sarah congregate in a Western-themed restaurant, in public, to summon the despised one by building a Stonehenge out of crap they find in the restaurant. Cover presents what could be an amusing scene of these culture-shocked people trying to blend in, with Cotton Mother speaking awkwardly formally, and Sarah pretending to be a guy, with the image of Nicholas Brendon playing a woman playing a man, but Cover just doesn't have the writing skill to bring it to life. He's clearly going for something, it just doesn't come together. Buffy gets there in time to subvert it. She pulls Sarah aside and convinces her that it's in her best interest to stop it, but Sarah plays both sides and momentarily turns on Buffy, allowing the despised one to be summoned in the body of the Master. Throughout the book, there are a number of interludes depicting the Master in a prison of some sort, something underground, where he's isolated but has a bunch of minions running around. You would be forgiven for thinking, oh, he's in the church. This must be set before Season 1, Episode 12, Prophecy Girl. And you would be wrong. He's actually in hell. His minions are random spirits that look like Susuwatari and bedsheet ghosts. It serves like the exact same purpose as the underground church setting, but it's technically after Prophecy Girl, so the Master is dead and in a hell that is functionally identical to his previous circumstances. The spiel on the back of the book calls it his supernatural prison. Like even the publisher couldn't figure it out. Yeah, I'm fairly certain that Night of the Living Rerun was written soon after Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, and then was revised following Prophecy Girl to be more compliant to canon. Instead of the Master being in the church with a bunch of vampires, now he's in hell with a bunch of spirits, and instead of rising out of the church to fight Buffy in a fulfillment of the suggestion that he would back in Season 1, Episode 2, The Harvest, he's rising out of hell to give Buffy a rematch following Prophecy Girl, which Buffy suddenly makes references to when she didn't before, like most of the book was written before it aired, and this is a bit of a rewrite. Given that this despised one Master is identical to the actual Master, I have to think that the original iteration of the book only had the Master, not the despised one. With Sarah's help, Buffy slays the Master once and for all. Sure. And the spirits return whence they came. Despite a horde of zombies being seen by a bunch of people, everyone just forgets because Sunnydale. The Scoobies move on with their lives. But Willow is upset that she didn't get a past reincarnation rerun, because that was so much fun for the others. But there's still some moon magic floating around, so when she falls asleep, she dreams of her past incarnation, John Goodman. In the dream, as Sarah slips away from the witch trials, John Goodman confronts her and confesses his love. Even if the love spell initiated his attraction, he recognizes that it has worn off, and yet he still feels smitten with her. They run off together, and Willow wakes in a good mood, happy that she has some romantic connection to Xander, like they're destined to be together. Okay, to get this out of the way, I'm glad that Cover was willing to have this transgender romance across lifetimes. That part is transgressive and fun. Shades of what Marty Noxon would do eventually in Season 2, Episode 19, I Only Have Eyes for You. Past that, this whole romance is messed up. Sarah sexually assaults John Goodman, and this is never acknowledged. It's the whole men are strong, women are weak thing, manifesting with a dismissal of women's ability to sexually assault men. Plus, love spells being unrecognized as date rape drugs in functionality, because the fantastic element confuses writers, and plus the idea that forgiving abusers is romantic. When you factor in the fact that this is about Xander and Willow, it's just so awful. Xander's past life sexually assaulted Willow's past life. Willow's past life forgave the offense, and this is supposed to be romantic? What were you thinking, Cover? And then there's the treatment of the Native Americans. The Salem witch trials took place shortly after the 9 Years' War, which involved a lot of truly brutal acts of violence from the Wabanakis, an alliance of Native American nations against the English colonials. These are human rights violations that should not be ignored, but neither should the fact that the English abused them first, out of a superstitious belief that the Native Americans represented some evil, Satan-worshipping people that the good Christian colonials needed to oppose. The Wabanakis were, in a sense, the first victims of the Salem witch trials. When the people of Salem started freaking out about witches, it was them figuring that the devil was both outside the walls, as the Wabanakis, and inside the walls as witches. And they first pointed fingers at Tituba, a Native American woman kept as a slave, and any colonials associated with her, because that's what they were raised to recognize as Satan worship. Night of the Living Rerun references the Wabanakis as Indians and savages. They are present as set dressing without context or any kind of sympathetic portrayal. Samantha Cain kills a bunch in her backstory, and this is just accepted as what someone would do in that setting. There's no context of her fighting in a war. It's just the idea that the colonials would fight Indians like cowboys in a western. Later on during the zombie attack, there is mention of an Indian zombie and a Spaniard zombie pulling themselves up from the ground. The European colonist zombie warrants an exact cultural identification, while the native with the right to be there just gets called an Indian. If you didn't know anything about the subject, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the native zombie and the natives who Samantha Cain fought are of the same people. Season 4, Episode 8, Pangs, has a myriad of problems, but at least they name the Shumash. And then, of course, the climax of the book takes place in a Western-themed restaurant. I don't think this was a coincidence. Of all the tie-in novels that existed up to this point, all three feature Western elements with Native Americans and cowboys. Or, you could say, cowboys and Indians. Halloween Reign had a costume party with a Native American picking a fight with a white douchebag in a racist native costume, while a pair of vampires dressed as a cowboy and a saloon girl. Coyote Moon had evil cowboys who stole magic from Navajos, and themselves embodied Navajo evildoers. And now Night of the Living Rerun uses a setting with Wabanakis in the background and a native zombie for good measure, all leading up to the climax in a Western-themed restaurant where waitresses dress up in costume. I suspect that during the hiatus between seasons 1 and 2, a WB executive was studying ratings and was like, "Hey, Westerns are popular these days. Why don't we incorporate that theme into our promising new show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, to make sure it gets good ratings? Westerns are big these days." And they kind of were, not so much in the late 90s as the early 90s, but you don't just take Westerns and try to shove them into a vampire show. That only works if you design it from the ground up to be a vampire Western.
Why is there a cowboy in Death of a Salesman anyway?
Season 2 has various Western themes that are so shoddily done that they feel like a forced element that some executive pushed on a gothic horror show. Season 2, Episode 3, School Hard, introduces Spike, who may have originally been a black cowboy.
He's known as William the Bloody, and is nicknamed by torturing his victims with railroad spikes.
Season 2, Episode 4, Inca Mummy Girl, has Xander and various extras dressed as cowboys, while Impada, an Inca, is literally a Native American, dressed in an exaggerated Inca outfit. You could say her and Xander dancing would represent the element of cowboy and Indian. And Season 2, Episode 12, Bad Eggs, introduces the gorgeous vampire cowboys. It is notable that all three of these Western-themed tie-in novels came out during Season 2, as if meeting a Season 2 theme presumed to be in place. I find it likely that the novels were written sometime during Season 1 for the Season 1 crowd, intended to come out during or just after that same season, but were held until Season 2 and underwent editing to bring them more in line with the later developments of Season 1 episodes. Perhaps during the rewrite, this new restriction was introduced. "We're doing a Western-themed show now. Add cowboys and Indians. I don't care if your plot has nothing to do with it. Make it work." Presuming this is true, Cover was forced to include both cowboy and native elements, and can't be judged for that. However, he can be judged for using them in the way he did. Halloween Reign used the elements subversively. Night of the Living Rerun reinforces the status quo. Halloween Reign was written like an episode of Season 1, sandwiched between Season 1 Episode 7 Angel and I, Robot You, Jane. Coyote Moon was written like an episode in between Seasons 1 and 2. Night of the Living Rerun does something different. It is essentially the author's idea for what Season 2 would be. There are a lot of elements and new characters introduced in Night of the Living Rerun, but it doesn't feel nearly as confused as Coyote Moon, because there's a sense of it spanning a larger chunk of time. The beginning of the story features a Slayer reincarnation flashback dream. This is like a Season 2 opener. Most of the plot is about an ongoing season arc, but there's also a nod to the intermittent Monster of the Week adventures going on in between the beats of the main story. In the middle of Buffy addressing a reincarnation, there are a few paragraphs describing her efforts to subvert an evil clown trying to mix piranha DNA with Sunnydale's rat population. A hilarious nod to the silliness of some of the episodes. I mean, just wait for Season 2, Episode 20, Go Fish.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, documents came into light, detailing experiments with fish DNA in their Olympic swimmers.
Yeah, tell me the mad scientist clown doesn't fit right in there. In general, the humor is great. Cover carefully analyzed the show and faithfully represents its own brand of humor. He really captures the character's speech patterns and the themes of silly subversion of horror movie tropes. The scene where the past incarnations summon the Master in the middle of a themed restaurant isn't just weird, it's very intentionally goofy. It feels like the same mindset that would eventually be used in Angel Season 3 Episode 15 Loyalty to make the joke where Wesley summons a spirit to speak through a fast food character. That cover could use the mandate to use cowboys creatively to make a joke that fits in with the theme of the show is great writing. Unfortunately, he doesn't describe all the humor that well. The whole thing where we're to imagine Nicholas Brendan playing a woman playing a man feels like a script direction. Cover just doesn't paint the scene for us. Overall, it's a fun adventure with some cringy parts. Next time on the Buffy Book Club, Buffy faces a pair of Chinese and Japanese immortals locked in a Highlander struggle and blooded.